Thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate that. I had the opportunity to sit next to Jeff Vinnick, and we leaned over and we've agreed that after that presentation by Mark, we need to order up a round of shots for everybody and get our minds right for what we need to do to work that out. But as Mark said, facts are facts and data is data, and the difference between the green-colored blocks and the red-colored blocks is leadership. And so it's not that this is preordained. It's not that this is on some kind of a manifest destiny. It's up to us to chart the course of this state and to change those statistics in the direction that we feel is important. And so it's a pleasure to be a part of that, and I applaud the Chamber's leadership in bringing the right people together to make that happen. It's my honor to sort of be the opening act for the real luncheon speaker, Richard Florida, who is the author of the creative class and really just an exceptional big thinker, something that we need in times like this. He's also the inventor of the Bohemian Index. The Boho Index is the creative tendencies of any given community, and you'll be pleased to know that Bartow scored well on the Boho Index, and so we're looking forward to hearing about how that goes. Jacksonville did not score particularly well on the Boho Index. Miami and Orlando did, but he must not have been there for the Florida-Georgia game when there's all kinds of bohemian activity taking place at the Landing. But to begin with, I just want to say that we're talking about the right issues, the big issues, the long-term issues. Bill mentioned that I got into this early, and it was because I felt at that time that the younger generation was getting blamed for everything that was going wrong, and we didn't have a seat at the table to do something about it. And that we needed to be focusing on these big, hairy, audacious goals that Jeb Bush had been talking about. We needed to be talking about a timeline that was beyond just the next fiscal year or the next election cycle. And so today we have an opportunity to really chart that course. And part of that is the team that we assemble to do that. And tomorrow you're going to get to hear from the rest of the cabinet. Pam Bondi, who focuses on the important things. She keeps our kids safe. She just banned another class of synthetic drugs that are getting our kids hooked and destroying communities and destroying families, and she's passionate about that issue and protecting women from being trafficked. She understands that business is an important and vibrant part of our state and does an exceptional job as our Attorney General. You're going to hear from Jeff Atwater, who understands fiscal prudence and keeps us all on track to make sure that the long-term trajectory of the state is moving in the right direction, and a governor who's focused like a laser on jobs. And all of these other things get better, get easier, get more affordable if people have jobs. And he understands that. And so that team, along with our legislative leadership, helps us to solve those problems. So what are those big long-term issues, and what are we going to do about it? Water is Florida's golden goose. In a state where so many of us are from someplace else, and we lack a common identity as a state, the closest thing that we have to that common state identity is an affinity for water. In the Panhandle, maybe it's Appalachia or the Emerald Coast. Maybe it's our springs in the Swanee Valley. Maybe it's the Everglades. Maybe you're a Gulf person. Maybe you're an Atlantic person. Maybe you're a freshwater person. But if you're a realtor or know anything about real estate, you understand the power of the words waterfront or water view, even if you get a little creative sometimes with that terminology of water view, Carrie O'Rourke. Like if you stand just like this, it's a water view. We're attracting 1,000 new people a day who have spent decades working someplace else, thinking about making this their home. The growth industry, development, real estate, population expansion requires water. $100 billion agriculture industry requires water. We haven't found a way to technology our way out of that. We still have to have water and sunshine to grow things. Our tourism industry is built around clean beaches, and when we foul them because the Corps of Engineers is dumping water out both coasts, then it destroys not only the real estate values, but the message gets out about tourism. And if we're serious about diversifying our economy, it comes down to water. We know that we will be 1 billion gallons a day short of water by 2030, and the legislation that Speaker Chris Foley and his partners in the Senate moved forward last year is a major step forward in true, comprehensive water policy planning and water quality improvement. It was the beginning, not the end. We need to build on that success, and we have to think about water infrastructure the way that we think about all of the other infrastructure needs in our state. As Floridians, we've internalized the price of progress, the cost of growth. When you read about the price of a new interchange or ultimate I-4 or a new parkway, any of those things, we've internalized that they're expensive, but we need them. And we accept them, and we use them, and we move forward. It's part of the work plan. We know that we can't sprinkle pixie dust and make all of congestion go away overnight. So we have a transportation plan that we work, we budget for it, we move through it, we think about it in regional terms. The same thinking has to be applied to water infrastructure. Pinellas County can't use Tampa Bay as their backup sewer treatment plan. And I'm not picking on Pinellas County, but Pinellas County is a large, successful, wonderful place, high-quality place to be. If they can't afford to make those improvements, how are Hendry and Glades counties going to be able to afford to make those improvements? So we have to have a cost-share program that elevates the infrastructure across the state. Florida's water issues are not limited to the Everglades, as these last few weeks have shown us. We desperately need infrastructure in the Swanee Valley to protect our springs. If we didn't have the Everglades in Florida, we would be most famous for being the only place on earth that has the number of first magnitude springs that we have. Saving the Apalachicola Bay communities and the economies that depend on it, and saving that oyster that's the best oyster on the planet. The St. Johns River, which is the key to Jacksonville's identity and part of its quality of life. Tampa Bay, just last year, banner headline, the healthiest it's been in 40 years. A week later, municipalities that were overwhelmed had to discharge in there. It is everybody's problem, not just one municipality or county. And water infrastructure and water supply planning better be baked into our conversations about our future. Because think about the Enterprise Florida debate that transpired last year and is going to continue into the next round next year. You couldn't print enough money to recruit a company to Flint, Michigan. There isn't an economic developer in the world. Not since P.T. Barnum has there been an economic development official who could persuade you to move your corporate headquarters to Flint, Michigan after that disaster, because they failed at the most basic function local government should provide, and it revolved around water. We can't take our eye off the ball when it comes to water policy for supply and quality in the Sunshine State, where it is our golden goose. The second piece of that puzzle, and how we keep this wonderful momentum moving that our governor and our legislative leadership have put in place with really the real work of the business community, where the state that was last and most impacted by the Great Recession has rebounded fastest and greatest. To keep that momentum going, we have to focus on education. We got a bad budget forecast that came out last week. And if you look at the numbers for the next 3 years, spending on Medicaid outpaces growth in spending on education 2 to 1. That is misplaced priorities, because if we're doing a better job educating our young people, preparing them for careers, educating them from world-class universities, they're not going to be on Medicaid. And so investing in a world-class education system where parents' and students' needs are put first, technology is leveraged to customize learning, and you aren't trapped in a neighborhood that by the state's own admission has schools that are failing your child just because you're too poor to get transferred into one that meets the needs of your children. That's the type of education innovation that's required, and we have begun to lose the support of the most important shareholders in the education conversation, and that's the parents. in many cases, the most involved parents. My children are in the Polk County Public School System. They go to the same schools I went to, and their education opportunities are completely different than they were when I was at Bartow High School because of the reforms that we have made in Florida that we're not fully getting credit for because parents have just taken it for granted instead of internalizing how much better and how many more choices their kids have than they did. When I was there, you went from Bartow Junior High to Bartow High School. That was it. Today in the same town, which hasn't grown since I left high school, it's the same size town. You can now go to International Baccalaureate. You can now go to Summerlin Academy, which is a high-performing military-style structure. When I was there, you could take maybe half a dozen AP classes. Now it's limitless thanks to virtual school and the fact that they've added International Baccalaureate. When I was there, you could take Spanish. Now you can take German, you can take Russian, you can take Arabic. The options for our kids to meet the needs of your individual kids have never been more different, but somewhere along the way we lost the support of them because we got wrapped around the axle of reform for reform's sake instead of having a bold vision to explain to parents why their children needed to learn things that were harder and more difficult and more comprehensive in the third grade than what we learned in the third grade. Because a lot's happened in the world since we were in the third grade. But focusing on that early education and bringing parents and students back and putting them first is going to mean better results down the road in terms of managing all of these other costs. And building out a workforce in a state where we talk all the time about getting kids college and career ready, but we really only mean getting them college ready. Our workforce development officials are second to none, and our 28 state colleges are second to none, but we need to give them the additional support to prepare those kids that you were all in school with, that we were all in school with, who had opportunities a generation ago that have been wiped out by the disruptive forces that have taken over our global economy. And the answer to a 50-year-old who thought that they had a really good career that was going to provide for their family when they lose their job, it has to be more than just, well, go on down the road and sign up for a few classes and sit next to your daughter and her friends in the same English comp class. Lifelong learning is going to be a part of Florida's future if we're going to have a competitive workforce. And the changes in the energy sector mean that we're more competitive on pricing relative to our southeastern states, which means that manufacturing will be a bigger part of Florida's future, diversifying our economy and bringing opportunities to rural parts of Florida that feel like they've been left behind by state officials. As we bring more manufacturing and logistics and warehousing and can compete for those energy-intensive jobs that in many cases are also water-intensive, we have an opportunity to create good-paying, high-skill, high-wage jobs for a generation that, if we don't focus on that, will be left behind and will add to the costs on the slides that Mark just showed us. So workforce development is as important a part of the economic development discussion as it is for us to get a second state university into the AAU, which is the elite class of research institutions, and we should focus on that as well. There's nothing wrong with a dual-track approach to higher education in Florida, because if we're only about elite schools, we're leaving an entire class of Floridians behind. And if we're only about workforce development, we're missing the opportunity to bring in that creative class, the entrepreneurial class that will create jobs that we didn't even imagine would be a part of Florida's future. That dual focus, workforce development and higher education, the elite and the highly accessible, will transform Florida's economy. And if you don't believe me, look at California, a state that screws everything up except higher ed. and they overcome an awful lot of bad decisions in every other aspect of their regulatory and legislative lives by attracting talented people who are drawn to people like themselves to study and learn and create and start up and blossom from there. That's what Florida can be as it relates to higher education. Florida is a small business state, and we should nurture and encourage our small businesses. I know that we've got the chamber professionals in here. You know what it's like to nurture your small businesses. It's the jackpot when you score somebody that's going to fill a vacant storefront on Main Street. Am I right? It's a jackpot when you get a new Hampton Inn in town so that people don't have to stay out of town when their daughter's getting married. And we need an economic development approach that is respectful of a small business mindset. That while we need a team that's out there searching for the next Mercedes-Benz plant and Boeing and Rockwell and all the other great shiny objects that everybody's after, singles and doubles will win the day and make communities' lives better each and every time. So let's not get focused on hitting a home run every day in economic development. Let's create the type of climate, regulatory, tax, litigious climate, that will attract people here to start that business. When a guy named George opened his first retail grocery store in Winter Haven, it was a small business that became Publix. When some guy came down to Bradenton and opened up another retail store to sell clothes, it became Bell's. But it began small. When an Italian immigrant who was squeezing orange juice decided maybe he could get a little bigger, and one day you've got Tropicana. It began in Florida as a small business. You can tell I've got daughters. When a lady named Lily Pulitzer was selling orange juice on the side of the road in Palm Beach, and she decided to sew something to keep her dress from getting sticky, it became a global brand. But it began small. And if we're job snobs, we're going to miss the opportunity to support those small business leaders who can create something big, but it has to begin somewhere. I want it to begin in Florida. We live in a state that not only people dream about coming to one day, in many cases, Uncle Sam forces them here. In fact, the making of modern Florida began with the training of troops during World War II. So we have this incredible talent pool who does a tour through Florida. They learn how to fly in the Panhandle. They manage a war halfway around the world out of Tampa. They manage an entire hemisphere and protect us from narcotics, manage out of Doral with Southcom. And a high percentage of the most highly trained, disciplined, talented, vetted veterans fall in love with Florida. They retire in their mid-40s and make Florida their home. What company wouldn't view our veterans pipeline as the most perfect workforce development pipeline out there? I want them in our classrooms instilling discipline in schools that have lost it. I want them sharing their passion and their energy and their content in businesses, in government, in the classroom, in the laboratory. That should be an Enterprise Florida pillar to focus on retaining veterans who are at a midpoint in their life with decades of service left in them and a drive that you can't instill in your employees but without the help of the drill instructors that Uncle Sam's already covered for you. Their HR department's done the work for us. And that's not just in the Panhandle. It's not just in the Panhandle. This is everywhere. 1,000 Friends of Florida came out with a study last week that projected Florida's population out to 2070. And it was an extraordinary, it's like the slideshow from Outbreak, if you look at the red spreading across the state. The lesson in that is that if you don't like sprawl, if you want denser growth patterns, the best thing that you can have in Florida is a vibrant, profitable agriculture industry. It's a $100 billion driver today, and it can be even greater. But the difference between a cataclysmic transfer of the landscape into uses overnight or a long-term thoughtful planning process is whether there's any money to be made in agriculture or not. And we face a crisis in the interior of the state, on the ridge, between Tampa and Orlando, in the very bullseye of the areas that were identified by that report with citrus greening. And while the purpose of this isn't to point out why we need to fix citrus greening specifically, it's to remind an urban state that green space and water recharge and wildlife habitat and quality of life and pastoral scenes are not old McDonald's farm. They are a high-tech, $120 billion industry known as Florida agriculture. From orchids in Homestead to horses in Ocala to citrus up and down the spine to the row crops of the Panhandle, it is a valuable part of our economy, and it supports many of the most rural communities in the state. And if you lose that, we've got a lot bigger problems that we have to deal with. True economic diversity in our state will deal with all of those industries. Finally, I would just say this. The most dangerous thing in Florida politics is a short memory. Everything changes so fast in Florida. I was with Pam not too long ago as they were unveiling their new solar field. And they informed me, this was before Hermine, they informed me at that time that 40% of FPL's customers were not in Florida when Charlie, Francis, Ivan, Jean, Katrina, and Wilma hit. It has a profound impact on how we bring our state together. And so the notion that we have to have a culture of problem solving is vital to Florida's future. The idea that we, in our smallest towns, are better off as Floridians because Miami and Jacksonville and Tampa and Orlando are there, because the creative class exists, because they're global destinations. And Tampa and Orlando and Jacksonville and Miami and Fort Lauderdale are better off because we have open spaces and $100 billion agriculture and places to bring manufacturing and bring intermodal facilities and bring trade and logistics and site Air Force bases and expand bombing ranges and bring in the new test pilots. We all benefit from the diversity that we usually are in the habit of insulting. The diversity of Florida, the geographic diversity, the diversity of our residents, the diversity of where they're from, the ideas that they bring with them, the idea that somebody can come down from Boston and fall in love with Tampa and end up being someone who's going to do the most for Tampa that's been done since Henry Plant ran the railroad down there in the form of what Jeff Vinnick's doing. That's the Florida that we can be when we pull together with that culture of problem solving. So that what's good for Hialeah is good for Wauchula. And what's good for Weewaw is going to be good for Callahan and Fernandina and Jacksonville. And it begins with those most basic things that we all have in common. We want our kids to have the best education possible. And we realize that a lot's changed since we were in school. We want Florida to have what makes Florida, Florida. Our special natural resources that bring people here to begin with. And we're going to have the opportunity through that political climate, regulatory climate, legal climate, that people can start that business in Florida. We know that some of the most talented people in the world are going to end up here at some point in their life. We want them 3 decades sooner. I want Florida to be more than the prize for a life well lived and the success accumulated someplace else. We can be the jumping off point for the American dream, the place where those dreams incubate, grow, develop, and explode into something big and beautiful. And our job is not to protect what we have in the sense of making sure that nobody can mess with it or nobody can come or nobody can go. In the 100 years that the Florida Chamber has been in Florida, think of all the giant companies that would have been the platinum sponsor of this event 10 years ago, 25 years ago, 50 years ago, that aren't in existence anymore. Our job is not to lock our businesses in place, because we would have picked unwisely a decade ago with banks, law firms, airlines, aerospace companies that have been wiped off the map. Our job is to create a climate that's agile, welcoming, receptive, dynamic, and ready for whatever may walk through that door, with the quality of our people and the reception of our state government and the love and the passion for making those dreams come true right here in the Sunshine State. That's the future of Florida. That's the future that I aspire for us, and all of us in this room can make that possible. Thank you very much.